Good morning, students. Hope you're all doing well. Now, in the last video lecture, we spoke about what kind of relationship the people, especially those involved in agriculture, had with their kings. And we spoke how this relationship could be often strained because of the high taxation demands of the king. Next, we spoke about some of the strategies that were adopted by the people living in this empire, okay, which could be innovative techniques or adopting different kind of agricultural tools in order to increase the agricultural production. Okay, now we'll begin with a new topic known as the differences in rural society. Now, once the strategies for increasing agricultural production was introduced in the society, those people who availed these benefits became better off, and those who could not avail these benefits, they obviously became worse off. And how was this reflected in a rural society? See, we'll apply a little bit of concept of economics. I hope you are aware with the term factors of production. So in modern times, if you have to include factors of production, there are 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital, and enterprise. But during that time, that is, we are talking about 600 BCE to 600 CEE. During that era, people who had access to factors of production, और उस समय का factors of production क्या था? Land, labor and new techniques. So people who had access to factors of production, they became economically powerful. ठीक है, जो लैंड, लेबर और न्यू टेक्नोलॉजी को कंट्रोल कर रहा था वो ऑटोमेटिकली इकोनॉमिकली स्टेबल एंड पावरफुल हो गया. एंड वंस दे बिकेम इकोनॉमिकली पावरफुल, these people could be seen as the landed elites within the rural structure. And because they were the landed elites, they were able to exercise power within the rural setup itself. So I hope you understood the chain reaction. What happened is that those who adopted agricultural practices, that is the new agricultural practices with all the innovative techniques and technology, they were able to become better off. Once they became better off, okay, they would be able to exercise control over a lot of land, and since they are economically stable or powerful, they tend to become the landed elites. So economically powerful, and once you have economic power, obviously you have a better clout at people, ज़्यादा bargaining power मिल जाता है. So these people also became politically powerful in the village setup. So this change in agricultural production, this technique had a rippling effect, which was not only seen in the production sphere of crops, but also in the society itself. Now, what are the sources through which we get a glimpse of this rural society existing at that time? The first one is Buddhist texts, which mention different categories of people associated with land. There are 3 categories mentioned in it. On the lowest rung, you have the agricultural laborers. Then you have peasants, which had their own land. And finally, you had large landholders. So the second and the third term, these people are designated as गृहपति. गृहपति को हिंदी में ट्रांसलेट करेंगे तो गृहपति हो जाएगा. ठीक है, and गृहपति means owner of the household. So it is generally these गृहपतिs who became village headman later on. That is, the economically powerful people were finally commanding political power in the rural society. So this stratification in the rural society, especially with people related to agriculture, was not only seen in North India but also in the South India, especially in the Tamilakam region. And how do we come to know about it? We come to know about it through the Sangam texts. Okay, remember the Sangam age where an assembly of poets and kings produced works of literature, economy, history, and all that. So, it is through these Sangam texts we come to know that even society in rural South India was also stratified. So, what are the some of the terms that are used to signify this? Okay. So, people living in South Indian villages, that is the Tamilakam region, were designated under different categories. And what are these categories? The landowner was known as Vellalar, the plowman was known as Uravar, and the slaves were called Adimai. So these differences in status or differences in hierarchy was on the basis of their differences इन एक्सेस टू फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन. अगर आपके पास एक्सेस है फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन के लिए देन ऑब्वियसली यू विल बी द मोर पावरफुल वन. इफ यू आर डिनाइड द एक्सेस टू प्रोडक्शन then you will be worse off. So the same was the case even in South Indian society. So it is in this time that the question over control over land becomes very prominent. Okay, and how do we come to know about it? See, the earlier texts that you had, whether it was Arthashastra or Dharma Sutras, okay, so it advised the kings various methods to acquire the territory and preserve the territory. वो king का काम था, acquiring more kingdoms and all. Now the legal text compiled during this period, they mention that what kings has to do in order to preserve the private property of the people. ठीक है? The king, he has to direct his officials to do certain acts which is mentioned in your source 6. Read it. So this signifies how actually important the question over who. Now we move on to the next topic, land grants and the new rural elites. So what are land grants? So grants of land made by the king or the emperor to a person or a charitable organization or to any religious organization was known as land grants. So this practice was also seen during the time of Mauryas and it continued till the time of Guptas and the later Indian tradition. But there was a marked difference between the land grants granted by the Mauryas and those of the Gupta. Let's talk a little bit about the Mauryan land grant. So within the Mauryan times, the grants of land that was made by the emperor to a religious organization or person, it was relatively rare. Okay, it is only during the time of Gupta period that the frequency of land grants, that is transferring the title deed of a particular land, became so much more, that is the frequency became increased. So these land grants could be made on stone, but during Gupta era, it increasingly was made on copper plates. Okay? In simple terms, think of it like transfer of property, papers. So instead of paper, you have copper plates, and instead of emblem of India, you have the seal of the king. So the language used in the land grants during the Gupta period was Sanskrit. अब कभी भी किसी चीज़ का language याद रखना है, so always keep it in your mind which language was that emperor or empire trying to patronize. For example, अगर मौर्यास का बात करेंगे, so the language they wanted to patronize or which was their official language was Pali और प्राकृत. गुप्ता टाइम में संस्कृत को बढ़ावा देने का कोशिश किया. So therefore the language used in their land grants would be Sanskrit. So there are three categories of land grants made during that time. You have to study only one. The first one was Brahmodaya, then you had Devodaya, and finally you have Agrahara. ठीक है, तो इसमें सबसे important, the most important, or the land grant which had the maximum number of benefits was the Agrahara land grant. So in the process of land grant, the person who is giving the land is known as the donor, which was usually a king or an emperor, because obviously he is the owner of all the land within its territory. And then you have the donee, that is the person who is receiving this land grant. So among the three land grants, we'll focus on the Agrahara land grant and the benefits associated with it. So what happened? Whenever a king or an emperor gave the Agrahara land grant to a Brahman or a religious organization, it automatically came with a host of other benefits. One such benefit was that it was tax free. That means the donee or the person who received this Agrahara land grant was not supposed to pay any income or revenue or a taxable income to the king. Then, if this land grant had a number of villages given in it, and a lot of people were living in these villages, so the person, the donee, would exercise a lot of judicial control over these people. He even got the authority to adjudicate disputes. And finally, all the services that was produced by this in these villages could be, a portion of it could be claimed by the Agrahara donee, and it was not to be transferred to or be received by the state officials who came there on regular visits. So what happens with the introduction of land grants? Now this part is not given in your book, so please pay attention. For the first time, you have a class of intermediaries that are born. Okay, till before this time, there was the king as the overlord and the peasants who were taking care of their land. But now you have a section of intermediaries. Okay, and who are these people? These intermediaries are these donees, okay, who have received the Agrahara land grant. So they became intermediaries. So a class of new intermediaries came into existence with giving of land grants. So a direct link that existed between the king and the peasants, it collapsed. You can say it was no more functioning, and you had an intermediary between them. So this is one of the most important result, a direct result of land grants, that is creation of new intermediaries, who were the donees of these land grants, who then became the new elite in the rural society. One such important land grant evident in the inscription is that issued by Prabhavati Gupta. Now, who was Prabhavati Gupta and what is the story associated with it? Prabhavati Gupta was the daughter of a Gupta king or Gupta emperor known as Chandragupta II. Okay, and she was married into a king of the Vakataka dynasty, which ruled in the central India. So, what happened is that her husband died and she was left with two children, okay, to take care of two children who were the heir to the throne. Since these heirs were babies, Prabhavati Gupta ruled on behalf of her sons for 20 years. until her son were big enough to take charge as king. You can think of her like Shivakami Devi of Bahubali, where she was taking care of two heirs to the throne, and then until and unless one of them was eligible enough to finally be the ruler of that particular kingdom. So, the same way, Prabhavati Gupta had to play this role. Now, as a queen who was ruling this stretch of land in central India, which was under Vakatakas, she also started this tradition of land grants. Okay, she also implemented this tradition of land grants. But this was a marked departure from the norm. And why is that? Because the Sanskrit text during till of that time or during that time, they mention that women did not have women's once they got married, they never had any access to the land. What did they have access to? Even today, I mean, abhi ye time, I'm sorry, they had access to Stridhan after they got married. So they had no access to the land passed down to the sons of the family. This was the entire setup. But Prabhavati Gupta's condition was vastly different. First of all, she was no ordinary woman. She was the queen of the empire who was ruling on the behalf of the heirs of the empire. So obviously, she was taking all the decisions that a king would have taken. Or the other thing might have been that whatever is mentioned in the Sanskrit text, it is just it had a preaching value. It was not implemented throughout the country. So दो ही चीज हो सकता है, या तो Prabhavati Gupta was able to give land because she has access to land as she was the queen and hence no longer an ordinary woman, or whatever is mentioned in the Sanskrit texts were not uniformly implemented throughout the country. Now, there is a source mentioned in your book, source 8, page 41, Prabhavati Gupta and the village of Danguna. So, please go through this text, this source, it is very important. It will provide you an information about what kind of benefits the donis of an agrahara received. Okay, and in this source, this violet portion, source 8, whatever is mentioned within the brackets, okay, these words or terms are added by the historians later on, so that it becomes easier for us to understand. So jitna bhi terms bracket mein diya hua hai, that is not present in the original inscription. Okay, they are added later on so that we understand it better. So go through this source, it is very important. Let us now look into the impact that these land grants had. So this topic in fact is a subject of debate between historians. So mostly DC Sarkar and if you have R.S. Sharma, these two people cannot arrive at a conclusion. So they have very divergent theories regarding what was the intention behind giving these land grants. Anyway, we look at some of these intentions and impacts of these land grants. So, one such impact, or you can say intention behind the land grant, was that the emperor or the king wanted to expand the frontiers of cultivation. Okay? So, by granting a land or a territory which was previously uncultivated, what the king managed to do was he ordered the Doni to expand cultivation in that area. So, in that way, cultivation got an impetus by the king. Another theory that exists is that these kings or emperors were slowly weakening and they were not able to produce enough cash. So instead of cash, what they did manage to do was give certain people or organizations land grants. So it was instead of cash. सो जब इकोनॉमी में कैश नहीं होता है, वी कम टू अ कंक्लूजन दैट द इकोनॉमी इज डिटोरिएटिंग. So that's one of the views that historians hold. Another view is that the king, by these creation of intermediaries, these rural elites, he wanted to build a group of powerful allies in the rural setup. Okay, since sometimes the samans, remember the samans we spoke in the previous lecture, who had the feudal relationship with the emperor, so sometimes they could act rebellious. So in order to have a control over his empire, instead of only leaning on Samans, the king decided to create a new class of elites, rural elites, whom he could trust. And the last theory that is associated with this is that the kings wanted to project themselves as Superman. That is, they were losing control, they had resigned themselves to the fate, but within a last ditch attempt to actually somehow survive, okay, just to showcase that glorious era, उस tradition को continue करने के लिए the kings granted lands. मतलब lands हैं मेरे पास तभी तो हम दे रहे हैं ना. So that is one idea the kings or emperors wanted to project. Let's Finally, what are the shortcomings of land grants when it comes to obtaining information about the rural society or the rural setup? See, problem kahan aata hai? These land grants usually focus more and more on the agricultural population. Okay, they don't talk about groups living outside the mainstream rural society. So who are these people who still lived beyond the reach of state officials? They are the pastoralists or the nomads, you can say. They could be hunter gatherer society living in forests. Then there could be artisans or traders who kept moving from one place to another. So these groups, okay, they are not mentioned in the land records. We don't have much idea about how they lived their lives. Okay, so that is one of the shortcomings of these land grants, that they are not able to provide us with a complete picture. Okay, this is it for today. Go through this, and you have an examination coming up, so it will be in the form of MCQ, and the topic for your exams is chapter 1, and from chapter 2 you have till page number 39, that is strategies for increasing productions. So all questions will be in the MCQ format. So go through your texts, read them carefully line by line, even the pink boxes. I will not ask question from the source, but definitely from the pink boxes. So go through it. All the best, keep studying and take care.